Hello, everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to give some trigger warnings for this talk, as there are mentions of COVID-19 and the near fatal experience of a family member. If you were a student at the Madeira School during the winter, you will recall that all classes were held online for a week due to increased COVID risk. I decided to stay back in California, where my home is, because my dad began having COVID symptoms. And the last thing I wanted to do was bring COVID on a 6-hour flight from California. At the time of the announcement, we were waiting on a result back from his COVID test. My parents are both healthcare workers, with my mom being an anesthesiologist and my dad being a general surgeon. We suspected that he may have caught the virus from operating on both Christmas Eve and Day or from when we went to watch Spider-Man No Way Home a few days prior. His test came back positive a few hours after we decided to stay home, and I was very glad that I had made the decision to stay back in California. Within 24 hours, myself included, my entire immediate family turned up positive with COVID-19. I continued recovering while taking classes online with Madeira. My sister, mother, and I all began to improve. But by that of day 5, my dad's symptoms were dramatically more severe. At the time, I knew the CDC allowed people to return back to work by day 5. I hadn't seen him for about a day and a half, but I was used to both him and my mother being gone for days at a time due to their occupations. My mother even coined the name helicopter kid for me, since I would religiously check the Find My iPhone app to find their whereabouts. Even now, living all the way across the country, I still check their locations to see what they're doing. At this time, however, it turned out he had been at the hospital for the past 48 hours. I figured he couldn't be working since he had such severe symptoms. I quickly found my mother, hoping that my intuition was wrong. She looked up from her laptop, only showing the pain through her eyes and attempting to conceal her worry that my father had been admitted to the hospital. It was then that I realized that he wasn't saving lives at the hospital, but that he was there to be saved himself. Roughly a day later, we found out that he was having heart and lung complications. I couldn't understand what was happening to my dad. He was receiving care at the hospital he's worked at for the past 15 years, or to put that into perspective, as long as I've been alive. The same healthcare workers that fought to save lives alongside my father during the COVID-19 pandemic were now desperately trying to preserve his. The same rooms where he's delivered catastrophic news to patients, watched friends and family members say their final parting words, and even the same medical machinery he'd monitored to provide life-saving care now served an entirely opposite purpose to him. Now, one of the biggest ways I connect with my dad is through basketball. I was playing on the same AAU team from the 3rd grade and up until I tore my right ACL in the winter of 2021. I would typically play for 5 hours on the weekends alone, participating in tournaments at a place called Hardwood Palace, a local facility with 8 full courts. The games would run close together with short breaks in between, and there was a cafe that provided meals in between long game days. And I always ordered a salty pretzel with that sketchy looking cheese that always looks a bit too orange. I feel that's a universal experience. There was an elderly man that worked there for as long as I could remember, but there was about a month-long period where he had been absent. Eventually, he returned to Hardwood Palace, and upon his return, I learned that he had had a health complication and that my father was the one who provided his life-saving care. He recognized me every time I saw him after that and even gave me a free pretzel. Because of experiences like this, I was so proud to say that my parents were healthcare workers growing up. It wasn't the first time that someone had recognized my dad in a seemingly random place because he had done their life-saving operation. I could do an entire TED Talk on these experiences alone. It is recalling these memories that made me question any beliefs of spirituality that I had had. How could my father, a man who dedicated his life to saving others, have his life threatened by disease so young and so quickly? For the week that he spent in the hospital, no one was allowed to visit him due to efforts to keep the spread of COVID-19 under control. I remember my mother communicating with my father while he was still in the hospital and her telling me that the situation was grim. Between the heart and the lung complications, his care team was skeptical of his survival chances, and I was faced with the crippling hopelessness. Family, in an ideal world, are supposed to be the ones who comfort you when times are rough. With my dad in the hospital and my mother still having to work with the looming idea of her husband passing away, I felt alone. But almost 3,000 miles away, my Madeira family was there for me. Checking in on me every day, making sure I had caught up on the work I had missed, I had no shortage of people watching out for me. My teachers, advisors, and other Madeira faculty somehow managed to make me feel supported, even though thousands of miles separated us. Friends from basketball reached out, and others I hadn't spoken to for months took time out of their day, regardless of what they too might be going through, to support an old friend. And in the end, my dad survived, spending 1 week in the hospital and another 6 weeks on oxygen support. He still has some serious lasting side effects, but still manages to play a one-on-one game with me every once in a while. And not to mention, posterizes me every chance he gets. And for this reason, I have a metaphorical proposal. Life is like sailing a boat. There will undoubtedly be storms or tough times ahead. We all have anchors to ground us in these storms, and in my case, my parents were my oldest, most reliable ones. But when catastrophe struck, they had their own matters to attend to. Other figures in my life stepped in, assuming this position of the metaphorical anchor, keeping me stable while the storm was raging. A sense of community is vital in order to stay grounded in times of stress. We witness the threads that keep us connected every day. By opening doors for one another, smiling at someone you know walking past, texting a friend, or other everyday acts of kindness, we affirm to each other that there is someone who cares. We are grounded, or anchored, I should say, by the idea that when hope is dwindling, or regardless of what you may be going through or experiencing personally, there is always someone watching out for us. From the strength that we receive from these boosts of hope, we should aim to be the hope for others by channeling the energy we received into making someone else's day. For example, the man who worked at the cafe received care from my father and expressed his gratitude through the goodness of cheesy pretzels. I personally can't imagine a better way. Find or make opportunities to express kindness into your community. I will forever be grateful to my lovely friends and amazing Madeira faculty, and I thank modern medicine every day for saving my dad. To my mother for her tireless work in ensuring his safety, and of course to my father's care team for their invaluable work. For my final remark, know that there will be things you can't control. Experiences you can't avoid, and people you can't protect. Find anchors where you can, and most importantly, be an anchor to others. Thank you.